Welcome to Precinct 444, a podcast by the National Law Enforcement Museum located in Washington, D.C. Here at Precinct 444, we cover a wide range of topics surrounding American law enforcement through our 4 core shows and bonus content. Today and in future bonus episodes, we will feature an artist from our current exhibit, Officers as Artists, so they can talk about their law enforcement careers and art interests. Be sure to check back every other week as we publish more episodes featuring an artist. And remember, our core shows are released every other Wednesday, so don't miss those. Thanks for listening, stay safe, and come see us in Washington, D.C.
All right. Welcome to another episode of our Officers as Artists series here on Precinct 444. I'm here today with T.C. Brown, whose piece, which is a photograph titled Birds at Sunset, is on display in our Officers as Artists exhibit. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Perfect. So to get us started, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners? So tell us a little about yourself, a little bit about the agency that you retired from, and just let us know a little bit about you before we get into the conversation.
All right. My name is T.C. Brown. I'm not trying to be secretive. That stands for Todd Curtis Brown for my mother's sake. Everybody else knows me as TC. I spent 20 years with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, retired out of Martinsburg, West Virginia in 2020. That is after spending 6 years at the Federal Supermax, 9 years at the complex in Tucson, and then last 5 years were with the Counter Terrorism Unit.
Oh, wow. And you're also an artist beyond just having had a successful law enforcement career. So tell us a little bit about the art that you do, and then tell us if you were doing this art while you were working as a law enforcement officer, or if it's something that just came up during retirement.
Yeah, photography has been a part of my life since I was actually probably preteen. It's always been a form of almost escape, and was certainly that way during my career. When you have those days that you'd like to not talk about, it's real easy to go out and, wherever you're at, and hike in the forest or hike where I'm at in the desert now, and just kind of forget the day and enjoy the nature or whatever is around you.
Absolutely. And the piece that's in the exhibit is definitely a nature piece. So tell us a little bit about Birds at Sunset. When we're looking at that piece, what are we looking at?
Well, the crazy thing about Birds of Sunset is we were driving down the road on vacation in Kentucky, and we come around a corner, just 2-lane road, and see this tree. And I go, that tree looks really different. And this sunset, I mean, the picture kind of shows it, but you're sitting there and the timing was right. And so we pulled over on a little shoulder and I took a few pictures, and suddenly the birds took off. I didn't know they were birds. I thought there were leaves on the tree. It's about late September, early October, and it goes, that's just something different. Suddenly, tens of thousands of birds take off. And it's like, oh, that's crazy. And they come back. And I said, well, I've got to try to capture this on film, on digital. I've got to try to capture this. And they did that for another 5 or 10 minutes. And I got that shot, which was just, when you look at it, you go, oh man, no Photoshop, no special filters, no anything. But there was a guy across the street that came over and said, what are you doing? I said, man, look at these birds. He says, we hate them. They make noise all day, all night, tear down trees. So what a different atmosphere to be out there and going. And so I told him my take of it, and he said, well, that's funny. If you hear a loud boom, it's just my air cannon going off to try to scare off the birds in my yard. I just thought it was hilarious, but this scene was just out of another world. While we were out exploring caves is really why we were in the area, and come around the corner, here's this crazy bird tree.
Yeah, and it is a very interesting photo because it's kind of like because of the way that the light is kind of behind the tree, all the birds just look kind of like shadows. They look
exactly
like they're just dark, and so you just see this like explosion of birds coming out from this tree. And it's a very visually striking piece, and it's always fun to hear the stories behind, especially photographs, but paintings as well. And here, like, it's capturing a moment in time and your perception of it. And to be able to have a local come up to you and be like, what are you doing? And kind
Yeah,
of get
yeah.
their juxtaposition to that same experience is really, it shows a lot about how we all perceive our world around us, which is kind of neat. Um, but you had mentioned that you did photography while you were on the job as well. What inspired you to start creating? Do you think that your decision to, and you mentioned you were taking photos long before you were a police officer or anything like that. But did your decision to like continue creating and really make photography a big part of your life come from wanting to cope with the stress of your job?
Oh, most definitely. The bad days, and most days weren't bad. That's the truth for me. For me, even working in the prison and penitentiary, I always told people most days I'm overpaid. The days that I'm underpaid are like no other. So those were the days that were just so worth it to just be able to go, man, I got a weekend coming up or I got whatever, and I'm going to be able to take some pictures. The interesting part about all that is that once they found out I knew how to take pictures, then I was able to do stuff at work
Mm.
that they paid me for that I just thought was hilarious. I got to go around and take pictures. They used me for events. They used me for, I was evidence recovery. I trained at the national level for that. And I just thought that was hilarious. Something I love and something that reduces my stress. They're going to pay me to do. Yeah,
Yeah,
please, please, please. Yes, more of that.
exactly. Yeah. Because there are a lot of artists that I've talked to since we started this exhibit that their departments have found ways to utilize their artistic skills and their talents and things like that in the job. And you mentioned that you went and had training for like evidence recovery, like photos. What does that training look like? Like what are they telling you to do
Uh,
essentially in
it
those?
really it's so many phases because they do drawings, they do actual descriptions of the evidence in the scene and everything, and the photography is just that visual effect to
Mm,
show everything from the different aspects, so that somebody that was never there, had never seen it, between the combination of everything, we could tell them and show them what the situation was, and that I was able to be not only trained but also end up at the latter part of my career training others just to be able to do that. It got to the point where even the FBI no longer came in and did the evidence recovery. We did it right on scene.
absolutely. Which is really interesting. So we teach a lot of like forensic workshops at the
Right.
museum, things like that, and have talk about evidence collection and how important it is to because one conversation that a conversation or a topic of conversation that comes up with every officer that I talk to about their experience, because everybody wants to know about cases you worked and things like that. They'll always say like document. There's so much more documentation
Oh
of
yes.
everything than you think. And so from our workshops, we're always telling like the high school kids or middle school kids, like, you have to have good writing skills. You have to have
Oh yes.
observation skills, and you have to be able to translate what you're seeing a into photographs and your written report. And so I guess going off of that, with that kind of observation skill, working in a crime scene but also as a photographer, how do you think that your skills as a photographer made you better at your job in law enforcement, if they did at all?
Well, I think you nailed it when you talk about observation. There was the biggest thing I always thought about was in my job was the communication skills, being able to talk to not just the inmates, the clientele, whatever you prefer to call them. I in my time it was an inmate. When you're talking to the inmates, you have to be able to communicate on their level. And so observation was the same thing. You had to be able to observe and see, hey, is what I'm saying getting across, or is this just, do I need to change because they're not going to change? And that's no different in the world around us, but they're not going to change their opinion or their way they do things. So I learned by observing that, hey, I need to kind of adapt and find ways to do it. And it was kind of interesting because even sometimes I'd be talking to them and they were real aware that I'd walk around with a camera, and they say, "Oh yeah, I used to do this with photography." And you kind of go, if you could get a hook where you could talk to them about something and get them out of that bad day they were having,
Yeah.
it usually was better for all of us. And if that's what it took. If it was humor, that worked. But a lot of times, just by observing, you could kind of figure out, oh, we need, this guy's visual. I need to talk to him about something he's seeing or something he's aware of. And then we were good.
The fact that this exhibit is happening at the National Law Enforcement Museum, which is right across from the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, has a special tie for you. So tell us a little bit about why you were so drawn to this exhibit and what it means to be a part of it.
Well, I was blessed because I was able to be there for opening night.
Mhm.
My wife and I traveled from Arizona and stayed down the street, and we were able to come to the museum. And it was the first time we'd been there was when we went to see the exhibit and got to see all that. But across the street is, I call it my wall because my father's there. He was killed when I was a young boy in Cochise County, Arizona. Leroy Brown is his name.
Mhm.
And so anytime I get to DC, I go to the wall. He's kind of the reason that law enforcement was, even in my thought process beyond when you're a little kid, you're like, oh, I want to be a police officer, a firefighter, it was always, I wanted to do something in law enforcement, somewhat as an honoring to my father, but also just in honoring his name that is etched on that wall.
To kind of wrap up as our big kind of overarching question that I've asked each of the artists, because the National Law Enforcement Museum seems kind of like an unlikely place to have an art exhibit, but it's a way that it's turning into this way that we're telling very human stories from real law enforcement officers from around the country. What does it mean to you to have a piece on display at the National Law Enforcement Museum with these 49 other law enforcement artists from around the country?
Well, it was interesting to be there because I was just amazed at the level of talent and creativity on this wall from a group of people that aren't always considered highly from the community around them, depending on their experience with law enforcement. And myself, even at the level of prisons, most people like, oh, you're a prison guard or whatever term you use. Is like, okay, yeah, that's what I did for a living. Okay, yeah, I'm good with that. But it was just amazing to me and so humbling to just walk in that room and get to meet some of the artists, but also just look at the pieces and go, wow, because they're just so, I call them loud. They speak to you, and it's not, they're not really subtle. Even my picture, it's just this, everything's going everywhere. It's kind of a little chaotic if you think about it, but the rest of the pieces, everything was just like, look at this. This is incredible. So to bring it to me, I'll just say it for me to have my piece on that wall was just so humbling because it allowed me folks to come in and just go, wow, there's something more to all these people. There's something more to T.C. Brown than just his way of life and making a living. That, wow, look what he did. That's pretty cool. And it was real fun to be able to sit behind, and because mine's kind of in a corner and just kind of hang out and act like I was looking at other things and hear people's comments and then go introduce myself and say thank you for those words, because that was very inspiring, because everybody was very positive about, wow, look at all this. So it was, it's humbling. It's just like, wow, look at that stuff.
Absolutely. And you mentioned inspiring. Like, I'm an artist that's been working on this exhibit. I kind of came in after they came up with the idea for the exhibit and have worked on like looking at kind of each individual artist's stories and things like that. And when coming up with this podcast series, I was like, I know I could talk about the art that I do and why it's important and how it helps me separate my kind of free time from my time at work and things like that. And my
Right.
job is by no means as stressful as a law enforcement officer's job. So it's kind of like it's been inspiring for me to be able to sit down with each of the artists and kind of talk about what you guys are inspired by and how important it is for you to have that kind of separation between who you are in your job and who you are when you're not working. And it's when you said inspiring, it was that is how this exhibit feels. And I'm glad to see that you guys feel that it's inspiring as well.
Oh,
So
yes.
absolutely. To kind of close, I guess, I've got one more question. If you could encourage any law enforcement officer to take up something creative, what would you say to them?
Oh, I tell them figure out a way to use that part of their brain. You need we talk about well-rounded and all the different things we need, and you need to use that creativity because it's in there. May not be what you think it's going to be, but just looking at the folks that had it on the wall and hearing the stories was like, you go, wow, yeah, you never painted before in your life, and after 6 months you're doing that kind of stuff just to give yourself that chance to express and experience. And if something doesn't work out, try something else. If it's not 2D, try 3D. Come up with something just to take your mind out of the day to day and use some creative side to it.
So TC Brown, thank you so much for joining me on Precinct 444 today. I'd like to invite all of our listeners to come see Birds at Sunset and the other pieces from our artists that are featured in the Officers as Artists exhibit. It will be open through August 30th of 2025. So we hope to see you all when you make your way to Washington, D.C. And thank you so much for this conversation today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this special bonus content featuring an artist from the museum's temporary exhibit, Officers as Artists, where the artworks of 50 law enforcement officers from all over the country are on display now through August 30th of this year. And remember, our core shows are released every other Wednesday, so don't miss those. Thanks for listening, stay safe, and come see us in Washington, D.C. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the Precinct.